What if I told you that the seeds of one of the Middle East's most enduring rivalries were planted long before a single shot was fired, in a time when maps were being redrawn and nations were just finding their feet? Watch until the end to find out how the very birth of two modern states set them on a collision course. Hey friends! Before we dive into one of the most complex yet fascinating stories in modern history, do me a favor. If you're ready for an epic journey through shifting alliances, secret operations, and dramatic confrontations, please subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. Your support truly helps us bring these vital stories to life. Gazodinzis. Spars. It all began in the aftermath of World War I, when the old Ottoman Empire crumbled and new states began to emerge under the watchful eyes of European powers. Among them were Iraq, forged from 3 Ottoman vilayets, provinces, and placed under a British mandate, and Palestine, also under British mandate, which was to become the future home of Israel. From Iraq's perspective, steeped in Arab nationalism, the Zionist project in Palestine was a direct affront to Arab unity and self-determination. Iraq, a nascent kingdom under figures like King Faisal I and later King Faisal II, and powerful prime ministers such as Nouri al-Said, quickly became a vocal opponent of the Zionist movement and, subsequently, the State of Israel. Nouri al-Said, a seasoned politician who served multiple terms as Prime Minister of Iraq, was a staunch pan-Arabist and deeply committed to the Arab cause in Palestine. His policies consistently reflected this unwavering opposition. So, while there wasn't a direct border nor immediate military clashes, the ideological battle lines were drawn from the very start. Iraq saw itself as a leading voice in the Arab world, a champion of Arab rights, and thus, its stance against Israel was foundational to its national identity. This wasn't just a political disagreement, it was an existential one. When the State of Israel was proclaimed on May 14, 1948, following the end of the British Mandate, Iraq immediately joined the other Arab states in declaring war. Iraqi forces, including a significant contingent of its army, deployed to the West Bank, then under Jordanian control, and engaged in fighting against the newly formed Israel Defense Forces. This participation, though not leading to direct occupation of Israeli territory or massive frontline battles, solidified Iraq's position as a frontline enemy, X-1000 or Son 1000D. By the end of this video series, you'll understand why Iraq, despite not sharing a border, became one of Israel's most consistent and dangerous adversaries. But for now, remember that 1948 wasn't just a war. It was the moment the ideological rift transformed into an active, albeit distant, conflict. X-1000s, 8,000 to watch until the end of this series to understand how this seemingly distant conflict evolved into direct military action and covert operations that shocked the world. Did you know that even after the official armistice agreements of 1949, Iraq uniquely refused to sign them, setting a precedent for decades of no peace, no war? By the end of this block, you'll understand why this decision was so significant and what it meant for the future of the Israel-Iraq relationship. X-1000D, X-1000Ds. After the dust settled from the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, most of the participating Arab states, including Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, signed armistice agreements with Israel in 1949. These agreements, mediated by the United Nations, effectively ended the direct fighting, though not the underlying conflict. However, Iraq stood apart. Under the leadership of figures like Prime Minister Nouri al-Said and King Faisal II, Iraq adamantly refused to sign any armistice with Israel. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It meant that, from Iraq's perspective, the state of war with Israel technically continued, indefinitely. X-1000, X-1000. This refusal solidified Iraq's position as an unyielding hardliner in the Arab-Israeli conflict. While other Arab nations would sometimes engage in back-channel diplomacy or even limited peace talks, Iraq remained steadfast in its rejection of Israel's existence. This principled, or perhaps rigid depending on your view, stance was deeply rooted in Iraqi pan-Arab nationalism, which viewed Israel as an illegitimate colonial entity imposed upon Arab lands. Borsigist. 80,000, Air 1000. The period immediately following 1949 saw Iraq focusing internally, dealing with political instability, coups, and the eventual overthrow of the monarchy in the 1958 revolution. Despite these internal upheavals, the hostility towards Israel remained a constant in Iraqi foreign policy, transcending different regimes. The new Republican government, established after the 1958 coup that saw the rise of Brigadier Abd al-Karim Qasim, continued this unwavering stance. Qasim, who became the strongman of Iraq, was a nationalist who maintained Iraq's firm anti-Israel position, seeing it as a popular cause that united various factions within his country, Shaktenduausend. While Iraq wasn't on Israel's immediate border, its continued state of belligerency meant that Israel had to consider a phantom front, a powerful oil-rich Arab state with a significant military that could, at any moment, decide to re-engage directly. This distant but persistent threat shaped Israeli strategic thinking. Israel was always keenly aware that Iraq was a potential major player in any future regional conflict, often providing financial aid or military support to other frontline Arab states. 1000D. Watch until the end of this video series to uncover how this no-peace policy led to actual military deployments and shocking covert actions decades later. By the end of this section, you'll understand why Iraq's 1949 decision was more than just a footnote. It was a blueprint for enduring enmity. Did you know that a major political shift in Iraq drastically escalated the rhetoric and potential for conflict with Israel, even without direct borders? By the end of this block, you'll see how the rise of a new political force hardened Iraq's anti-Israel stance significantly. The political landscape in Iraq was turbulent in the 1960s. After the 1958 revolution that toppled the monarchy, the country saw a series of coups and counter-coups. This instability culminated in the rise of the Ba'ath Party. While the Ba'athists had a brief stint in power in 1963, their true ascent to dominance came in 1968, marking a pivotal moment in Iraq's history and, consequently, its relationship with Israel. 1000D. The Ba'ath Party, with its blend of Arab nationalism and socialism, brought a far more radical and uncompromising ideology to power. Unlike previous regimes that, while hostile, might have entertained pragmatic considerations, the Ba'athists under figures like Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr and, increasingly, Saddam Hussein, saw the conflict with Israel as an ideological cornerstone. For them, Israel's existence was an affront to Arab dignity and a symbol of Western imperialism in the region. 1000D. Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, who became president of Iraq in 1968, was a key figure in the Ba'ath Party's rise. While initially the public face, he increasingly relied on his ambitious cousin, Saddam Hussein, who quickly consolidated power within the party and the state apparatus. Saddam Hussein, who would eventually become the undisputed leader, was a relentless proponent of pan-Arabism and a fervent opponent of Israel. He viewed the conflict not just as a defensive necessity, but as an opportunity for Iraq to assert its leadership in the Arab world by taking the hardest line against the Zionist entity. 1000. Under Ba'athist rule, Iraq intensified its military buildup, fueled by burgeoning oil revenues. While much of this buildup was aimed at internal control and regional rivals, a significant portion was always conceptualized in the context of a future confrontation with Israel. Iraqi propaganda became overtly aggressive, frequently calling for Israel's destruction. 1000D. This era also saw Iraq becoming a staunch supporter of various Palestinian armed groups, providing them with financial aid, training, and political backing. This support further cemented Iraq's role as a major player in the broader Arab-Israeli conflict, even without a shared border. It meant that Iraqi influence and its animosity towards Israel could be projected far beyond its immediate geographical vicinity. 1000D. So, while the main Arab-Israeli wars of 1967 and 1973 would primarily involve Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, Iraq's role was more than just rhetorical support. By the end of this block, you'll appreciate how the Ba'athist regime's rise fundamentally transformed Iraq's approach, making it an even more formidable and ideological foe. Watch until the end to discover how this hardened stance translated into actual military deployments in the next major Arab-Israeli conflict. Did you know that despite its ideological fervor, Iraq's physical participation in the Six-Day War was hampered by distance and logistical challenges, yet it still played a significant role in shaping perceptions? By the end of this block, you'll understand the complexities of Iraq's involvement and its long-term impact. X-thousand dapt, thousand deep. When the Six-Day War erupted in June 1967, pitting Israel against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, Iraq, under the Ba'athist government, though still with Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr as president and Saddam Hussein consolidating power, immediately pledged its support to the Arab cause. This was a critical test of the Ba'athist regime's pan-Arab rhetoric. True to form, Iraq committed military forces to the conflict. However, Iraq's geographical distance from the primary fronts presented significant logistical challenges. Unlike its Arab allies, Iraq did not share a direct border with Israel, meaning its forces had to traverse Jordanian territory to reach the front lines. This journey was complex and time-consuming, hindering their timely deployment. 1000D. Despite these hurdles, Iraq did manage to deploy elements of its air force and ground troops. Iraqi Hawker Hunter fighter jets participated in attacks on Israeli airfields, notably during the initial hours of the war, though with limited effectiveness against Israel's preemptive and devastating airstrikes. On the ground, an Iraqi expeditionary force, including armored units, managed to reach Jordanian territory. These forces were intended to reinforce the Jordanian front, particularly in the West Bank. However, the lightning speed of Israel's victory meant that many Iraqi units did not see significant combat before the war's conclusion. The war, which lasted only 6 days, saw Israel rapidly defeat the combined Arab armies, capturing the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan. The Iraqi forces that had arrived in Jordan found themselves largely out of position as the fronts collapsed. X-thousand-D. While their direct military impact on the outcome of the war was limited due to logistical constraints and the swiftness of Israel's victory, Iraq's participation was still symbolically important. It reaffirmed its commitment to the pan-Arab struggle against Israel and showcased its willingness to deploy forces, even from afar. For Iraq, the defeat was humiliating, reinforcing the Ba'athist belief that a stronger, more ideologically pure Arab army was needed to confront Israel effectively in the future. X-thousand D. This period after 1967 saw Iraq redouble its efforts to build a powerful military, determined not to be caught unprepared again. By the end of this video, you'll see how this desire for military strength would lead to far more direct confrontations. Watch until the end to discover how Iraq's strategic thinking evolved after this humbling experience, setting the stage for future, more direct challenges to Israel. Did you know that even after the 1967 war, Iraq continued to play a role in the ongoing low-intensity conflict, significantly boosting its strategic importance in the region? By the end of this block, you'll learn how Iraq's financial power and military ambitions quietly shaped the regional balance. Thousand eat. Why diddies? Following the devastating defeat of 1967, the Arab-Israeli conflict entered a new phase known as the War of Attrition, 1967-1970. This was primarily fought between Egypt and Israel along the Suez Canal, characterized by artillery duels, commando raids, and aerial engagements. While Iraq did not have a direct front in this conflict, its role behind the scenes and its growing military might became increasingly significant. Yak-thousand-D. Under the consolidated power of the Ba'ath Party, with Saddam Hussein steadily rising in influence under President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, Iraq embarked on an ambitious program of military modernization. Flush with oil revenues, Baghdad poured vast sums into acquiring advanced weaponry from the Soviet Union and other suppliers. This included tanks, artillery, and advanced fighter jets, transforming the Iraqi armed forces into one of the most formidable in the Middle East. This period also saw Iraq increase its financial and political support for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, and other Palestinian factions. Iraqi funds were crucial for sustaining these groups, and Baghdad became a significant diplomatic hub for Palestinian leadership. This support was part of Iraq's broader strategy to position itself as a leading Arab power, a champion of the Palestinian cause, and a consistent thorn in Israel's side. X1000D. One notable personality from this era was Yasser Arafat, chairman of the PLO, who often found common ground and vital support in Baghdad, despite ideological differences with the Baathists. His interactions with Iraqi leaders like Saddam Hussein underscored Iraq's growing influence on the Palestinian struggle. While Iraqi troops were not engaged in direct large-scale combat during the War of Attrition, Iraq maintained a considerable military presence in Jordan and Syria, acting as a strategic reserve and a constant reminder of its potential to intervene. This Eastern Front concept, involving Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, was a continuous concern for Israeli military planners, even if it never fully materialized into a unified, effective force. The increasing military strength and the unwavering anti-Israel rhetoric from Baghdad did not go unnoticed in Jerusalem. Israeli intelligence began to view Iraq not just as a distant ideological foe, but as a future military threat, capable of projecting power beyond its borders. This growing concern would eventually lead to some of the most dramatic covert operations in the conflict's history. X1000D. By the end of this video series, you'll discover how Iraq's pursuit of military dominance and its ideological commitment to confronting Israel would lead to some truly unprecedented events. Watch until the end to find out how Iraq's ambitions would soon push it into a much more direct and dangerous confrontation with Israel. Did you know that in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Iraq's military intervention, though delayed, played a far more significant role than in 1967, especially on the Syrian front? By the end of this block, you'll understand just how critical Iraq's contribution was and why it caught Israel off guard. Das ist Kurs, Wazik 1000D. When Egypt and Syria launched their surprise attack on Israel on October 6, 1973, initiating the Yom Kippur War, Iraq was quick to respond. Unlike 1967, this time Iraq's intervention was both more substantial and more effective, particularly in aiding its Syrian ally. President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr and his increasingly influential deputy, Saddam Hussein, saw this as a chance for redemption after the 1967 humiliation and an opportunity to further assert Iraq's leadership in the Arab world. Within days of the war's outbreak, Iraq began deploying significant military assets to the Syrian front. This included 2 armored divisions, 2 infantry divisions, and several squadrons of its air force. This was a massive logistical undertaking, moving thousands of troops, tanks, and vehicles across hundreds of miles to a battle zone. The timing of Iraq's arrival was crucial. While the initial Syrian offensive had made significant gains in the Golan Heights, the Israeli counteroffensive was rapidly pushing them back. The Iraqi forces, though not part of the initial surprise attack, arrived at a critical juncture, reinforcing the collapsing Syrian lines and helping to stabilize the front. The Iraqi 3rd Armored Division, in particular, engaged in fierce tank battles with Israeli forces in the central Golan Heights, buying valuable time for the Syrians to regroup. These engagements were bloody and intense. Iraqi units fought valiantly, suffering heavy casualties, but also inflicting losses on the Israelis. Their presence forced Israel to commit more resources to the northern front than initially anticipated, relieving some pressure on the Egyptian front in the south. This coordinated effort, even if imperfect, highlighted the potential threat of an eastern front that Israel had long feared. Hostility. Key Israeli figures like then Chief of Staff David Elazar and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan later acknowledged the unexpected resilience and ferocity of the Iraqi intervention. The sheer volume of Iraqi forces that arrived and their willingness to engage decisively surprised Israeli intelligence, which had not fully anticipated the scale or speed of their deployment. Pound. The Yom Kippur War, though ultimately an Israeli military victory, was a psychological triumph for the Arab world, restoring some pride after 1967. For Iraq, its role in the war, particularly its crucial intervention on the Syrian front, solidified its image as a committed, if distant, fighter against Israel. It also reaffirmed Saddam Hussein's belief in the importance of a strong, modern military to achieve Iraq's regional ambitions. By the end of this series, you'll understand how this significant Iraqi participation set the stage for a new phase in the conflict, one characterized by growing Israeli concern over Iraq's military capabilities, especially its pursuit of unconventional weapons. Watch until the end to discover how this concern led to one of the most audacious preemptive strikes in modern history. Did you know that after the 1973 war, Iraq's determination to confront Israel shifted focus, leading them down a dangerous path, the pursuit of nuclear capabilities? By the end of this block, you'll understand why this decision became Israel's gravest concern and triggered one of its most daring operations. In 80,000 Following the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Saddam Hussein's power in Iraq continued to grow, culminating in his official ascension to the presidency in 1979, taking over from the ailing Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. Saddam, a shrewd and ruthless leader, drew key lessons from the war. While Iraqi forces had performed creditably, the overall Arab defeat underscored a critical point for him. Conventional military superiority against Israel was difficult, if not impossible, to achieve consistently. This realization, combined with his ambition to make Iraq the undisputed leader of the Arab world, pushed him towards a more unconventional path. Saddam Hussein became convinced that true strategic deterrence and the ultimate leverage against Israel lay in acquiring weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons. He saw a nuclear program as the ultimate equalizer, allowing Iraq to project power and deter any potential Israeli aggression, or even to challenge Israel's very existence without relying solely on conventional forces. Under Saddam's direction, Iraq significantly accelerated its nascent nuclear program. While Iraq was a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, it began to secretly pursue capabilities that went beyond peaceful nuclear energy, focusing on enriching uranium and developing the infrastructure for a nuclear bomb. A key component of this program was the Osirak nuclear reactor, a French-built facility near Baghdad. Iraq insisted it was for peaceful research, but Israel and much of the Western intelligence community viewed it as a thinly veiled attempt to produce weapons-grade plutonium, 1000D. This pursuit of nuclear weapons became Israel's absolute red line. For Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Menachem Begin, a nuclear-armed Iraq posed an existential threat. Begin, a former Irgun commander and a hardliner, believed that Israel could not afford to allow any hostile Arab state to acquire nuclear weapons, especially one as ideologically committed to Israel's destruction as Ba'athist Iraq. The memory of the Holocaust deeply influenced Begin's strategic thinking. He vowed that Israel would never again be led like lambs to the slaughter. Israeli intelligence, particularly the Mossad, began to closely monitor Iraq's nuclear progress. The information they gathered painted a grim picture. Osirak was nearing operational capacity, and it could soon provide Iraq with the plutonium needed for a bomb. The clock was ticking, X1000D. By the end of this video, you'll witness how this growing nuclear threat pushed Israel to consider military action. Watch until the end to discover how Israel prepared for what would become one of the most audacious and controversial military strikes in history, aiming to halt Iraq's nuclear ambitions at any cost. Did you know that Israel launched a preemptive airstrike deep into Iraqi territory in 1981, targeting a nuclear reactor, an act that shocked the world and became a textbook case of preventive warfare? By the end of this block, you'll uncover the daring details of Operation Opera and its immediate aftermath, X1000 or X1000D. As Israeli intelligence continued to monitor the Osirak, also known as Tammuz 1, nuclear reactor in Iraq, the alarm bells grew louder. Estimates suggested that the reactor, supplied by France and Italy, would be hot, meaning it would contain enriched uranium that could be processed into weapons-grade plutonium by the summer of 1981. For Prime Minister Menachem Begin and his defense establishment, waiting until the reactor became active was too risky, as a strike at that point could unleash a dangerous radioactive cloud over Baghdad. They believed a preemptive strike was the only viable option to neutralize the threat. The planning for the daring operation, codenamed Operation Opera, or sometimes Operation Babylon, was meticulous and fraught with peril. The mission required Israeli F-16 fighter jets to fly over 1,000 kilometers, 600 miles, undetected through hostile airspace, primarily Jordanian and Saudi Arabian, to reach the target near Baghdad. The pilots were among Israel's elite, including Ilan Ramon, who would later become Israel's first astronaut. On June 7, 1981, a squadron of 8 F-16 fighter jets, escorted by F-15 support aircraft, took off from Etzion Air Base in the Sinai. Flying at extremely low altitudes to avoid radar detection, the Israeli jets successfully penetrated Iraqi airspace. At approximately 6:30 p.m. local time, they reached the Osirak facility. In a swift surgical strike lasting less than 2 minutes, the F-16s dropped their bombs, accurately hitting and severely damaging the reactor's core and auxiliary buildings. The attack was a stunning success from Israel's perspective. There were no Israeli casualties, and the Osirak reactor was effectively put out of commission, setting back Iraq's nuclear program by years, if not decades. On the Iraqi side, 10 Iraqi soldiers and 1 French technician were killed in the strike. The international reaction was swift and largely condemnatory. The United Nations Security Council, in Resolution 487, strongly condemned Israel for its clear violation of the Charter of the United Nations. Many nations, including the United States, criticized the act as a violation of sovereignty. However, privately, some intelligence agencies acknowledged the potential threat Iraq posed. Prime Minister Begin defended the strike vigorously, stating, "There will never be another Holocaust. Never again will there be a Jewish Auschwitz." He argued it was an act of self-preservation. X1000 SAD. For Saddam Hussein, the strike was a profound humiliation, exposing the vulnerability of his supposedly robust air defenses. He vowed revenge, but his immediate focus would soon shift to another, much larger conflict. X1000Ds, X1000D. By the end of this video, you'll discover how Operation Opera, despite its controversy, fundamentally reshaped strategic thinking about nuclear proliferation in the Middle East and beyond. Watch until the end to see how Iraq's response was ultimately overshadowed by a brutal war that ironically provided Israel with a different kind of strategic respite. Did you know that just months after the Osirak strike, Iraq became embroiled in one of the longest and bloodiest conventional wars of the 20th century, a conflict that ironically served Israel's strategic interests? By the end of this block, you'll understand how the Iran-Iraq War became a massive, unintended strategic gift for Israel. X1000D. Just 3 months after the Israeli strike on Osirak in June 1981, Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion of Iran in September 1980. This ignited the brutal Iran-Iraq War, a conflict that would rage for 8 devastating years, costing millions of lives and vast economic resources. While seemingly unrelated to the Israel-Iraq conflict, this war had profound and unforeseen consequences for the regional balance of power, dramatically altering Iraq's focus and capabilities. 2000 For Saddam Hussein, the invasion of Iran was driven by several factors, capitalizing on the post-revolution chaos in Iran, seizing disputed territory, curbing Ayatollah Khomeini's revolutionary Islamic influence in the Arab world, and asserting Iraq's dominance in the Persian Gulf. What he envisioned as a swift victory, however, devolved into a grinding trench warfare stalemate reminiscent of World War I. From Israel's perspective, the Iran-Iraq war was, somewhat paradoxically, a strategic windfall. A prolonged conflict between its two most formidable non-allied regional adversaries meant that both Iran and Iraq would be consumed by their mutual struggle. This effectively removed Iraq as an immediate military threat to Israel. Instead of focusing its vast military arsenal and resources on the Zionist entity, Baghdad was forced to expend them on the Eastern Front. This period allowed Israel a strategic breathing room that it otherwise would not have had. With Iraq's military tied down, Israel could prioritize other security concerns, such as the ongoing conflict in Lebanon or the Palestinian issue, without the constant threat of a massive Iraqi military intervention on its eastern flank. Despite the animosity towards Iraq, there were even reports of covert Israeli arms sales to Iran during certain periods of the war. These were often justified as a means to prolong the conflict, keeping both major threats preoccupied and weakened, and perhaps even to support certain factions within Iran that might be less hostile to Israel in the long run. This complex enemy of my enemy dynamic underscored the intricate and often contradictory nature of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Key personalities from this period include Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, Iran's supreme leader, whose revolutionary zeal pushed Iran into a protracted war, and of course, Saddam Hussein, whose aggressive gamble inadvertently secured Israel's Eastern Front for nearly a decade. By the end of this video, you'll see how this 8-year conflict, though a tragedy for millions, bought Israel invaluable time and significantly altered the trajectory of the Israel-Iraq conflict. Watch until the end to discover how, even with Iraq preoccupied, Israel maintained a vigilant watch, anticipating the day Iraq would once again turn its attention westward. Did you know that after the devastating Iran-Iraq war, a victorious but heavily indebted Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, quickly re-emerged as a major regional threat, prompting renewed Israeli anxieties? By the end of this block, you'll understand why a victorious Iraq was seen as even more dangerous by Israel. After 8 years of brutal fighting, the Iran-Iraq War finally ended in a stalemate in August 1988. While Iraq proclaimed victory, the reality was grim. The country was burdened with immense foreign debt, a crippled economy, and a massive but exhausted military. However, Saddam Hussein emerged from the conflict not as a defeated leader, but as the perceived defender of the Arab nation against revolutionary Iran. This newfound, albeit fragile, prestige emboldened him, and his focus soon shifted back to regional dominance and, inevitably, to Israel. With the immediate threat from Iran gone, Israel once again became a primary concern for Baghdad. Saddam had a massive battle-hardened army, now equipped with a vast array of conventional weaponry, and he was determined to leverage this power. His rhetoric against Israel intensified, becoming more defiant and threatening than ever before. He continued to fund and support Palestinian groups, and used every opportunity on the international stage to condemn Israel. Crucially, Iraq's ambitions for weapons of mass destruction, WMD, did not cease with the destruction of Osirak. Instead, the program went deeper underground and diversified. Saddam pushed for the development of chemical and biological weapons capabilities and, crucially, an indigenous long-range ballistic missile program. Iraq had used chemical weapons against Iran and its own Kurdish population during the war, demonstrating a terrifying willingness to deploy them. The development of longer-range missiles, such as the Al-Hussein, a modified Scud missile, meant that Baghdad could potentially strike targets deep within Israel from Iraqi territory. EPSIs, Ars 2000, Iras 1000. This was a nightmare scenario for Israel. A nuclear program was one thing, but a chemical or biological weapons program, coupled with missiles capable of reaching Tel Aviv, presented an immediate and tangible threat. Israeli intelligence services like Mossad and Amman were intensely focused on monitoring these developments. The memory of the Yom Kippur War and the Osirak strike underscored Israel's vulnerability and its absolute determination to prevent any existential threat. 1000D, Ace 1000D, key figures in Israel during this period, such as Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and Defense Minister Moshe Arens, were acutely aware of Iraq's renewed menace. They understood that Saddam, now unburdened by the Iranian war, might turn his formidable military machine westward. 1000 do. By the end of this video, you'll see how Saddam's post-war ambitions, particularly his WMD programs and missile capabilities, brought Iraq and Israel to the brink of a new kind of confrontation. Watch until the end to discover how this rising Iraqi threat directly contributed to the next major regional crisis and Israel's surprising restraint. Did you know that during the First Gulf War, Iraq launched dozens of ballistic missiles at Israel, even though Israel was not a direct participant in the conflict? By the end of this block, you'll understand why Saddam Hussein targeted Israel and how this unprecedented attack reshaped regional dynamics. X1000D. The decade after the Iran-Iraq War saw Saddam Hussein's ambitions soar, culminating in his audacious invasion of Kuwait in August 1990. This act triggered an international crisis, leading to the formation of a broad, US-led coalition aimed at liberating Kuwait. While Israel was not part of this coalition, Saddam Hussein sought to draw Israel into the conflict, hoping to break the Arab coalition's unity and turn the war into an Arab-Israeli conflict. Thousand wars. Saddam's strategy was clear. If he could provoke an Israeli retaliation, it might force Arab states to withdraw from the coalition, thereby weakening the international resolve against Iraq. To achieve this, from January 17, 1991 onwards, Iraq launched 42 Scud ballistic missiles at Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv and Haifa, over the course of the war. These attacks were indiscriminate and terrifying for the civilian population. While the conventional warheads were not highly accurate and caused relatively limited casualties, 2 direct deaths but dozens from heart attacks and other related issues, plus significant property damage, the psychological impact was immense. For the first time in its history, Israeli civilians were under sustained missile attack from a distant enemy, and the country was directly engaged in a conflict without its military actively fighting back. This was a profoundly difficult situation for Israeli leaders, particularly Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. There was immense public pressure for a strong military retaliation against Iraq, as was Israel's usual doctrine. However, the United States, under President George H.W. Bush, exerted enormous pressure on Israel to exercise restraint. The U.S. feared that an Israeli counterstrike would indeed fracture the delicate Arab coalition, which included nations like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. To deter Israeli retaliation and demonstrate commitment to Israel's security, the U.S. deployed Patriot missile defense batteries to Israel and launched intensive Scud hunts within Iraq. Despite the provocations and the psychological toll, Israel, to the surprise of many, largely held its fire. This was an unprecedented display of strategic patience and a testament to the strong U.S.-Israeli alliance. While some Israeli aircraft did fly reconnaissance missions over western Iraq to help locate Scud launchers, no retaliatory airstrikes were conducted. By the end of this video, you'll discover how the Gulf War missile attacks created a new dimension in the Israel-Iraq conflict and further cemented Israel's determination to counter WMD and missile threats. Watch until the end to understand how this event shaped Israel's future defense doctrines and its approach to potential threats from rogue states. Did you know that, even after the Gulf War, the conflict between Israel and Iraq continued through a complex web of international sanctions, covert surveillance, and ongoing deterrence efforts? By the end of this block, you'll understand how the international community tried to contain Iraq, and how Israel adapted its strategy. After the liberation of Kuwait in February 1991, Iraq faced severe international consequences. The United Nations Security Council imposed a stringent regime of sanctions aimed at dismantling Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, WMD programs, and preventing their resurgence. UN Special Commission, UNSCOM, inspectors were tasked with overseeing the destruction of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons capabilities, as well as ballistic missiles with ranges over 150 km/s. For Israel, this period was one of cautious relief, but continued vigilance. While the international sanctions and inspection regimes significantly curtailed Iraq's immediate WMD threat, Israeli intelligence remained deeply suspicious of Saddam Hussein's intentions. They believed Iraq was constantly attempting to conceal its programs and rebuild its capabilities whenever possible. The experience of the Scud attacks during the Gulf War had left an indelible mark, proving Iraq's willingness to target Israel and its potential to do so from afar. During this post-Gulf War period, Israel's focus shifted from preemptive military strikes to intense intelligence gathering and strategic deterrence. The Israeli defense establishment, including its intelligence agencies like Mossad and Amman, maintained a high level of surveillance on Iraq, closely monitoring any signs of WMD proliferation or missile development. They shared intelligence with the United States and other allies, emphasizing the continued threat posed by Saddam's regime. Israeli military doctrine also adapted. The threat of non-conventional attacks from Iraq and other distant adversaries reinforced the importance of missile defense systems. This period saw increased investment in developing and deploying advanced missile defense technologies, such as the Arrow missile system, designed to intercept ballistic missiles. Key figures in this era, such as Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who returned to power in 1992, and later Benjamin Netanyahu, consistently highlighted Iraq as a long-term strategic threat, even as they engaged in peace processes with the Palestinians and other Arab neighbors. They understood that despite the sanctions, Saddam Hussein's fundamental animosity towards Israel remained unchanged. Despite the lack of direct military engagements, the conflict persisted in the shadows, a battle of intelligence, technological development, and diplomatic pressure. Saddam, for his part, continued his anti-Israel rhetoric, even amidst his country's suffering under sanctions, using it to rally support domestically and within certain Arab circles. By the end of this video, you'll see how this period of containment eventually gave way to a new, dramatic phase in the Israel-Iraq relationship. Watch until the end to discover how Iraq's defiance of UN resolutions eventually led to another major international intervention and the ultimate removal of Saddam Hussein from power. Did you know that while Israel was not a direct participant in the 2003 Iraq War, its perceived security concerns significantly influenced the Bush administration's rationale for intervention? By the end of this block, you'll understand Israel's complex non-role in Saddam's final chapter, X-1000D. The period following the First Gulf War saw increasing friction between Iraq and the United Nations. Saddam Hussein consistently obstructed UN weapons inspectors, leading to a decade of no-fly zones over Iraq and occasional coalition airstrikes aimed at enforcing compliance. The US and UK, in particular, grew increasingly frustrated with Iraq's defiance and suspected continued WMD development. G-1000D. In the wake of the September 11, 2001 attacks, the administration of U.S. President George W. Bush adopted a more assertive foreign policy, linking rogue states with WMD capabilities to the threat of terrorism. Iraq, with its history of WMD programs, its non-compliance with UN resolutions, and Saddam Hussein's hostile rhetoric, became a primary target of this new doctrine. Gazado Huando. While the main stated reasons for the 2003 invasion of Iraq were Iraq's alleged WMDs and links to terrorism, Israel's security concerns undeniably played a background role in the broader strategic thinking in Washington. Neoconservative voices within the U.S. administration and influential think tanks often highlighted the threat, a nuclear or WMD-armed Iraq posed to Israel, arguing that removing Saddam would enhance regional stability and Israeli security. Thousands D. Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, publicly supported the American stance against Saddam Hussein, viewing his regime as an enduring and unpredictable threat. Sharon, a seasoned military leader and political hawk, had long regarded Saddam as an existential danger due to Iraq's WMD ambitions and its history of missile attacks on Israel. However, Israel was not asked to participate militarily in the 2003 invasion, and indeed, consciously kept a low profile to avoid legitimizing Saddam's attempts to frame the conflict as an Arab-Israeli one. As Ichbar 6000, Iwer Zeskark 1000 store series, as is, during the invasion itself, which began in March 2003, Israel once again prepared for potential Iraqi missile attacks, similar to 1991. Patriot missile batteries were reactivated, and public alerts were issued. However, unlike 1991, no Iraqi missiles were launched at Israel during the 2003 conflict. This was partly due to the speed and overwhelming force of the coalition invasion, which rapidly overwhelmed Iraqi defenses and secured potential launch sites, and perhaps also due to a deliberate Iraqi decision not to provoke an Israeli response that could complicate their defense. X-thousand Ausendeers. The rapid fall of Saddam Hussein's regime in April 2003 marked the end of an era of direct, state-sponsored antagonism from Baghdad towards Israel. The removal of Saddam, who had consistently sworn to destroy Israel, was seen by many in Israel as a significant strategic gain, even if the subsequent instability in Iraq would present new challenges. Thousands do. By the end of this video, you'll discover how Saddam's downfall, far from ending the complexities, ushered in a new, unpredictable phase for Israel's security calculations regarding Iraq. Watch until the end to understand how the post-Saddam era created a vacuum that allowed for new threats to emerge, changing the nature of the conflict entirely. Did you know that with Saddam Hussein gone, the nature of the Israel-Iraq conflict didn't end, but rather transformed into a more diffused and complex set of challenges? By the end of this block, you'll understand how the instability in post-Saddam Iraq created new indirect threats for Israel. X-thousand wars. The removal of Saddam Hussein in 2003 brought about a dramatic shift in Iraq's internal dynamics and its regional standing. The centralized authoritarian regime that had been Israel's consistent, if distant, adversary was gone. In its place emerged a fragile, deeply fractured state grappling with insurgency, sectarian violence, and the slow, difficult process of nation-building. X-thousand. For Israel, this new reality presented a mixed bag. On one hand, the existential threat of a WMD-armed Iraq actively seeking Israel's destruction was gone. The consistent state-sponsored animosity had dissipated. There was no longer a powerful, unified Iraqi army poised to intervene in future Arab-Israeli wars or launch missiles at Israeli cities. However, a new set of concerns quickly emerged. The instability in Iraq created a vacuum that allowed for the rise of various non-state actors, including sectarian militias and radical Sunni insurgent groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, later ISIS. While these groups were primarily focused on internal Iraqi conflicts and fighting the US-led coalition, their extreme ideologies often included virulent anti-Israel sentiments. The fear was that a destabilized Iraq could become a breeding ground for extremist groups that might eventually turn their attention towards Israel, or that weapons could fall into the wrong hands. 1000 Furthermore, the rise of Iran's influence in post-Saddam Iraq became a significant strategic concern for Israel. With the Ba'athist regime gone, the Shiite majority government in Baghdad naturally gravitated towards closer ties with Shiite Iran, a major regional rival of Israel. Iran, through its Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and proxies like Hezbollah, already posed a direct threat to Israel. The prospect of an Iran-aligned Iraq potentially facilitating the movement of Iranian weapons or personnel closer to Israel's borders became a serious long-term worry for Israeli strategists. X1000D. Key Israeli intelligence figures and policymakers, like then Mossad Director Meir Dagan and various defense ministers, continuously monitored the evolving situation in Iraq. Their focus shifted from preemptive strikes on state-level WMD programs to tracking the proliferation of conventional arms, the movements of Iranian-backed militias, and the rise of Salafi jihadist groups, 1000 or 1000. So, the direct conflict with the Iraqi state ended with Saddam's downfall, but the post-war chaos opened up new avenues for indirect threats and complex strategic challenges. The enemy became less clearly defined, more fluid, and harder to directly counter. 1000 or 6000 all. By the end of this video series, you'll gain a full appreciation for how dramatically the nature of this conflict has shifted over the decades. Watch until the end to discover how this new, complex regional landscape eventually led to a renewed, albeit different, form of Israeli military action in and around Iraqi airspace in more recent times. Did you know that in the years following Saddam's fall, Iraq, while no longer a direct state adversary to Israel, became a critical arena for Iran to project power closer to Israel's borders? By the end of this block, you'll understand how Iran leveraged the instability in Iraq to potentially establish a new front against Israel. 1000. After the 2003 invasion, Iraq's political landscape was profoundly reshaped. The vacuum left by Saddam's Sunni-dominated Ba'athist regime allowed for the emergence of Shiite political parties and militias, many of which had historical ties to, or ideological alignment with, Iran. As the new Iraqi government struggled to establish control and fight insurgencies, Iranian influence grew steadily through various channels: political, economic, cultural, and crucially, military. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, particularly its Quds Force under the command of the charismatic and shadowy General Qasem Soleimani, played a pivotal role in cultivating these ties. Soleimani, a master of asymmetric warfare and regional influence, helped organize and train various Iraqi Shiite militias, transforming some of them into formidable paramilitary forces. These groups, such as Kataib Hezbollah and Asaib al-Haq, became key players in Iraqi security, often operating outside the full control of the central government. For Israel, this development was deeply alarming. While the direct threat from a unified Iraqi army had vanished, it was replaced by the prospect of Iran establishing a contiguous land bridge, or Shiite crescent, extending from Tehran through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon, reaching the Mediterranean and Israel's northern border. This would allow Iran to more easily transfer weapons, fighters, and advanced military technology to its proxies, primarily Hezbollah in Lebanon and various militias in Syria. Israeli defense planners began to view Iraqi territory, particularly its western reaches bordering Syria, not as a source of direct Iraqi state aggression, but as a potential transit route and staging ground for Iranian-backed forces or advanced weapons systems aimed at Israel. The worry was that Iran could position long-range rockets, drones, or even precision-guided missiles in western Iraq, bringing a new vector of threat to Israel, effectively extending the northern front, Syria and Lebanon, eastward. Key Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, consistently articulated this concern, publicly highlighting Iran's regional expansionism and its growing influence in Iraq and Syria as a major threat to Israeli security. They argued that Iran's ultimate goal was to encircle Israel with hostile proxy forces. By the end of this video, you'll see how Israel's concerns over Iranian entrenchment in Iraq and Syria led to a new phase of covert and overt operations. Watch until the end to discover how Israel adapted its military strategy to counter this evolving Iranian threat, even in territories not traditionally considered part of its immediate conflict zone. Did you know that in recent years, Israel has reportedly conducted airstrikes within Iraq, not against the Iraqi state, but against Iranian-backed targets, marking a new covert phase of the Israel-Iraq conflict? By the end of this block, you'll uncover the reasons behind these alleged strikes and their strategic implications. 1000 AD. As Iran's influence solidified in post-Saddam Iraq, and the fear of a land bridge of weapons transfers grew, Israel began to contemplate expanding its ongoing campaign between wars, known as Maybam in Hebrew, Ma'aracha Be'en Ha-Milhamat, beyond Syria and Lebanon, into Iraqi territory. This Maybam strategy involves continuous, often covert, military and intelligence operations aimed at preventing Iran and its proxies from accumulating advanced weapons, building up military infrastructure, or transferring destabilizing arms, 1000 Ds. While Israel rarely officially comments on specific operations in Iraq, numerous international reports, satellite imagery analysis, and statements from Iraqi and regional officials have indicated that Israel has carried out airstrikes against targets in Iraq since at least 2019. These strikes are distinct from the historical conflict with the Iraqi state. They are part of Israel's broader campaign against Iranian entrenchment in the region. 1000 D. The alleged targets of these strikes have primarily been warehouses, convoys, and missile bases used by Iranian-backed Shiite militias, often storing advanced weapons systems like precision-guided missiles, PGMs, that Iran seeks to transfer to its proxies in Syria and Lebanon. Israeli intelligence believes these weapons, if successfully deployed, could significantly enhance the threat posed to Israel's northern border. The logic is that destroying these assets further back in the supply chain within Iraq is more effective than waiting for them to reach closer to Israel. 1000 D. General Qasem Soleimani, before his assassination in January 2020, was reportedly a key figure in orchestrating these weapons transfers and the buildup of Iranian-backed capabilities in Iraq. His strategic vision for a contiguous front against Israel made Iraq an increasingly important link in Iran's regional military network. The Iraqi government has found itself in a difficult position, caught between its sovereignty and the powerful influence of Iranian-backed militias on its soil. Denouncing the alleged Israeli strikes is often a political necessity for Baghdad, even as it struggles to control the very militias that are being targeted. For Israel, these operations in Iraq represent an expansion of its strategic depth in confronting Iran. They underscore Israel's determination to prevent Iran from establishing a permanent military foothold or a reliable weapons corridor through Iraq, which would fundamentally alter the regional balance of power. X1000 D. By the end of this video series, you'll fully grasp the evolving nature of the Israel-Iraq dynamic, from state-on-state antagonism to a complex shadow war against non-state actors and foreign influence. Watch until the end to discover how this new type of conflict continues to shape regional alliances and tensions, even today. Did you know that the modern Israel-Iraq conflict is increasingly being fought not with tanks and planes in direct combat, but with advanced intelligence, cyber operations, and the silent hum of drones? By the end of this block, you'll understand how technology has transformed the nature of this complex rivalry. X1000 D. In the contemporary landscape, where Iran's growing influence and the proliferation of non-state actors define the threat from Iraq, Israel's strategic response has become highly sophisticated and technologically driven. Gone are the days of mass troop movements across borders. The new battleground is often in the digital realm and the skies, using advanced intelligence and precision tools, X-1000, 1000D. A significant aspect of Israel's ongoing shadow war involves extensive intelligence gathering. Israeli agencies continuously monitor Iraqi territory, especially western Iraq, and routes leading to Syria, for signs of Iranian weapon transfers, militia movements, and the establishment of new bases. This relies heavily on signals intelligence, SIGINT, human intelligence, HUMINT, and sophisticated imagery intelligence, IMINT, from satellites and drones. The goal is to build a real-time picture of Iranian and proxy activities to enable timely interdiction. X-1000 A-1000D. Unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, or drones, have become a crucial tool in this new phase. These drones are reportedly used for reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition, providing invaluable data for potential strikes. While specific details remain classified, their deployment over Iraqi airspace for intelligence purposes is a clear indication of Israel's continued vigilance over this distant, yet strategically important, arena. Beyond traditional intelligence, there are also reports and speculation about cyber operations playing a role. Disrupting logistics, communications, or even operational capabilities of Iranian-backed groups through cyber means could be another layer of the conflict, though such activities are, by their nature, highly secretive. For Israeli military planners, preventing the entrenchment of Iranian precision-guided missile factories or launch sites in Iraq is a paramount objective. These PGM factories, often disguised as civilian facilities, pose a particularly acute threat due to their accuracy. Identifying and neutralizing such sites requires extraordinary intelligence capabilities and precision strike options, where drones and advanced aerial platforms become indispensable. A6000D SAR 1000D SAR. This technological approach allows Israel to project power and counter threats without necessarily requiring large-scale ground forces or risking direct state-on-state confrontation with Iraq. It's a precise, targeted, and often covert strategy aimed at degrading specific capabilities of Iranian proxies and disrupting their supply lines. Dan 1000D, Darn 1000D. By the end of this video series, you'll grasp the full spectrum of tools and tactics employed in this ever-evolving conflict. Watch until the end to discover how these technological advancements are reshaping regional security and constantly redefining the boundaries of the Israel-Iraq conflict. Did you know that despite the historical animosity, the common threat perception of Iran has, in recent years, led to quiet, informal realignments between Israel and some Arab states, potentially including a very subtle shift in the broader Iraq context? By the end of this block, you'll understand how shared anxieties are redrawing the Middle East's strategic map. X-1000 sees X-1000D. The post-Saddam era in Iraq, characterized by Iranian ascendancy and the rise of non-state actors, has significantly altered the strategic calculus across the Middle East. For decades, the primary fault line was the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, a new equally potent division has emerged: the Sunni Arab states and Israel against Iran and its Shiite proxies, 1000D. This shift has created an unprecedented, albeit largely undeclared, convergence of interests between Israel and several Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain. These nations share a profound concern over Iran's nuclear ambitions, its ballistic missile program, and its destabilizing regional activities through proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and increasingly, Iraq. While Iraq's government formally remains opposed to Israel, the growing presence of Iranian-backed militias on Iraqi soil is a source of concern for many Iraqis themselves, particularly Sunni and some moderate Shiite factions, as well as for neighboring Arab states. This shared unease creates a subtle, indirect alignment of interests. For instance, efforts by certain Iraqi factions to push back against excessive Iranian influence or to assert greater national sovereignty are viewed favorably in Jerusalem and by Arab capitals, N-1000D, 6000D. This doesn't mean a sudden warming of diplomatic ties between Baghdad and Tel Aviv. Far from it. The political sensitivities within Iraq, still deeply rooted in pan-Arabist and anti-Zionist sentiments, make any overt normalization impossible for the foreseeable future. However, it does mean that Israel's actions to counter Iranian entrenchment in Iraq, whether through intelligence sharing or alleged strikes, are not always met with the same level of condemnation from certain regional players as they once would have been. 1000D. Key figures like Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Emirati leaders have, while publicly maintaining support for the Palestinian cause, implicitly acknowledged shared strategic threats with Israel. This quiet shift means that Israel's shadow war in Iraq and Syria, aimed at Iranian proxies, aligns with the broader regional efforts to contain Iran, even if specific actions are not openly endorsed. By the end of this video series, you'll grasp the intricate web of alliances and antagonisms that define the modern Middle East, where former foes might share common anxieties. Watch until the end to discover how Iraq, once a central state adversary, has become a complex theater in a much larger regional power struggle that continues to evolve. Did you know that the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, while a horrific humanitarian crisis, inadvertently created a peculiar, unspoken common interest between Israel and various regional and international actors, including elements within Iraq? By the end of this block, you'll understand this strange convergence. A's, aspix 1000D. The emergence of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, in 2014 plunged the region into a new level of chaos. Seizing vast swathes of territory across Iraq and Syria, ISIS established a brutal pseudo-caliphate, threatening regional stability and committing horrific atrocities. While ISIS's primary targets were the Iraqi and Syrian governments, as well as minority groups, their extremist ideology also declared war on all infidels, including a clear and explicit hatred for Israel. X-1000. For Israel, ISIS represented a different kind of threat compared to the state-level conventional armies of the past, or even the state-sponsored proxies of Iran. ISIS was a non-state, ideologically driven, and utterly ruthless terrorist organization. While their immediate focus wasn't Israel, the prospect of a well-resourced, fanatical entity establishing itself on Israel's northeastern border, via Syria, or having a strong presence in the broader region was a serious concern. The group's capacity for inspiring attacks globally also presented a general security risk. X-1000D. Paradoxically, ISIS's rise created a highly unusual, unspoken alignment of interests among diverse actors, including the US, European nations, Russia, Iran, the Syrian regime, Iraqi government forces, Kurdish Peshmerga, and even indirectly, Israel. All these parties, despite their profound differences and ongoing antagonisms, found themselves united by the immediate imperative to defeat ISIS. X-1000D. While Israel did not directly participate in the anti-ISIS coalition operations in Iraq, it did provide humanitarian aid to Syrian civilians on its border and reportedly conducted limited strikes in Syria to prevent ISIS, or other radical groups, from gaining too strong a foothold near its lines. More significantly, ISIS's rise forced Iran and the Iraqi government to focus their resources on fighting the extremist group, diverting their attention and capabilities away from other fronts, including potential actions against Israel. X-1000D. The multi-sided conflict against ISIS demonstrated the fluidity of regional alliances. It highlighted that immediate shared threats could temporarily overshadow deeply ingrained historical animosities. For Israel, the ISIS threat reinforced the need for robust intelligence gathering and flexible response capabilities in a rapidly changing regional environment. X-1000D. The fight against ISIS showcased that the Israel-Iraq conflict was no longer a simple bilateral state-on-state affair, but a complex multi-layered environment where numerous non-state actors, often with their own extreme agendas, could emerge and shift the strategic landscape. Tausendai Batkuandais and Mamdur. By the end of this video, you'll gain a deeper understanding of how the ISIS crisis, though temporary, reshaped some of the underlying dynamics in the broader Middle East. Watch until the end to discover how the decline of ISIS paved the way for renewed focus on the Iran-Israel proxy conflict within Iraq. Did you know that after the defeat of ISIS, Iran significantly deepened its military and political presence in Iraq, triggering renewed Israeli concerns about a growing threat on its distant flank? By the end of this block, you'll understand how the ISIS victory paradoxically empowered Iran and complicated Israel's security. The defeat of ISIS, achieved through a combination of international coalition efforts, Iraqi government forces, Kurdish Peshmerga, and critically Iranian-backed Shiite militias, left a power vacuum in many parts of Iraq. Iran, through its Quds Force and proxies, was quick to capitalize on this. Having played a substantial role in fighting ISIS, the Iranian-backed Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF, gained immense legitimacy, political clout, and military experience within Iraq. This period saw a significant consolidation of Iranian influence across Iraq. The PMF militias, while nominally under Iraqi command, often received direct guidance, funding, and weaponry from Tehran. They established bases, controlled key supply routes, and wielded considerable political power, especially in areas bordering Syria. This strengthened Iran's ambition to create a strategic corridor from Tehran to Beirut, cementing its regional axis of resistance against Israel. For Israel, this was an alarming development. The temporary distraction of ISIS was over, and the underlying, more strategic threat of Iranian entrenchment resurfaced with greater intensity. Israeli intelligence reports indicated that Iran was not only transferring advanced weaponry, like precision-guided missiles and drones, through Iraq to Syria and Lebanon, but also potentially establishing manufacturing capabilities for these weapons on Iraqi soil itself. This would effectively turn parts of Iraq into a forward base for operations targeting Israel, dramatically reducing the warning time for potential attacks. Key Israeli figures, particularly Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and then IDF Chief of Staff Aviv Kohavi, repeatedly voiced concerns about Iran's military entrenchment in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Kohavi, for example, explicitly stated that Israel was operating to prevent Iran from creating a ring of fire around it. The rise of sophisticated Iranian-made drones and cruise missiles, often operated by proxies, added a new layer of complexity to the threat assessment. The assassination of Iranian Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani and PMF Deputy Chief Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis in Baghdad in January 2020 by a U.S. drone strike, though a U.S. operation, was seen by many as a significant blow to Iran's efforts to consolidate its influence and its military buildup in Iraq. Soleimani was the architect of Iran's regional strategy, including the network of Iraqi proxies. By the end of this video, you'll see how this Iranian consolidation pushed Israel to consider more direct and aggressive countermeasures, leading to a new level of covert action. Watch until the end to understand how the shifting sands of Iraqi politics continue to shape Israel's ongoing shadow war against its most formidable regional adversary. Did you know that in recent years, a series of mysterious explosions at military bases in Iraq, reportedly targeting Iranian-backed militias, were widely attributed to Israel, signaling a significant escalation of its covert campaign? By the end of this block, you'll uncover the details of these shadowy attacks and their profound implications. Following the increased Iranian consolidation in Iraq post-ISIS, Israel's strategic patience wore thin. The intelligence indicated that Iran was not just transferring weapons through Iraq, but potentially establishing arms depots and even manufacturing facilities for advanced missiles and drones within Iraq, deep in territory outside immediate conflict zones like Syria. This presented a new, unacceptable threat vector. X-1000, X-1000D. Starting in mid-2019, a series of unexplained explosions rocked military bases in Iraq, particularly those used by the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF, the umbrella organization for many Iranian-backed Shiite militias. These included significant blasts at bases like Camp Ashraf, Balad Air Base, and the Sakyar military base south of Baghdad. The targets often involved ammunition depots or missile storage sites, causing massive secondary explosions that inflicted substantial damage. X-1000, Shans, Gausendar. While Israel maintained its usual policy of ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying involvement, these incidents were widely attributed to Israeli airstrikes by regional and international media, as well as by some Iraqi officials and militia leaders. The sophisticated nature of the attacks, often involving precision and minimal collateral damage, pointed to a highly capable air force, and Israel was the primary regional power with both the motive and the means to carry them out. These alleged strikes represented a significant expansion of Israel's campaign between wars, Maybam. Previously, such operations were largely confined to Syria and, to a lesser extent, Lebanon. Extending them into Iraq, hundreds of kilometers from Israel's borders, demonstrated Israel's determination to confront Iranian entrenchment wherever it posed a threat, regardless of distance. It also signaled that Israel would not allow Iraq to become a safe haven or an uncontested logistical hub for Iran's military buildup. Stars they stole. For Iran and its Iraqi proxies, these strikes were a clear message that their efforts to establish a new strategic front against Israel would not go unchallenged. Figures like Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, before his death, and other PMF commanders openly blamed Israel, vowing retaliation, though concrete responses were rare due to their ongoing internal struggles and the devastating impact of such precision targeting. 1000D. This period marked a new, highly covert, and geographically expansive phase of the Israel-Iraq conflict. It moved beyond the direct state-on-state rivalry of the past into a complex shadow war against a transnational, state-sponsored network. X-1000D. By the end of this video, you'll gain a full appreciation for the evolving tactics in this conflict, where information and deniability are as crucial as firepower. Watch until the end to discover how this new type of engagement continues to shape regional stability and the unpredictable future of Israel's security. Did you know that despite the dramatic shifts in regional alignments and the shared concern over Iran, formal diplomatic normalization between Iraq and Israel remains a distant dream? By the end of this block, you'll understand the deep-seated political and historical reasons why peace, even cold peace, is unlikely. 1000D. Even as Israel forged the Abraham Accords with some Gulf Arab states like the UAE, Bahrain, and later Morocco and Sudan, normalizing relations and opening new avenues for cooperation, Iraq remained conspicuously absent from any such discussions. Unlike its Arab neighbors, Iraq's path to normalization with Israel is fraught with immense internal challenges and historical baggage that make it virtually impossible in the current geopolitical climate. X-1000D. Several factors contribute to this enduring diplomatic freeze. Firstly, historical memory remains powerful. Iraq was a founding member of the Arab League, a primary participant in the 1948 and 1973 wars against Israel, and refused to sign any armistice agreements. Generations of Iraqis have been raised on narratives of steadfast opposition to Israel, deeply ingrained in nationalist and religious discourse. Erasing this history is not simply a matter of political will. X-1000er. Secondly, the internal political dynamics in post-Saddam Iraq are highly complex. The Iraqi government is a delicate balance of diverse ethno-sectarian groups, including a powerful Shiite bloc with strong ties to Iran, a Sunni minority, and a semi-autonomous Kurdish region. Any Iraqi leader attempting to publicly normalize relations with Israel would face immense domestic backlash, accusations of betrayal, and likely political ruin, if not worse. The Iranian-backed militias, in particular, would vehemently oppose any such move, seeing it as an existential threat to their ideological stance. Thirdly, the Palestinian issue continues to resonate strongly within Iraqi public opinion across sectarian lines. While some Arab states have de-emphasized the Palestinian cause in favor of strategic interests, many Iraqis still view it as a central Arab concern, making normalization with Israel deeply unpopular. Key Iraqi political figures across the spectrum have consistently ruled out normalization. Figures like former Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi, while seeking better relations with Gulf states, always maintained a firm public stance against normalization with Israel, reflecting the prevailing national sentiment and political reality. 1000D Sachi, 1000D sees. For Israel, this means that while it actively engages in a shadow war against Iranian assets in Iraq, it has no direct diplomatic channel with Baghdad. Any communication or deconfliction would have to occur through third parties, highlighting the unique and isolated nature of this ongoing conflict. X1000D A Sardanig. By the end of this video, you'll appreciate the profound challenges that stand in the way of any formal peace between Israel and Iraq, even as the nature of their conflict has drastically changed. Watch until the end to discover how this lack of official ties complicates regional security and the future of the Middle East. Did you know that within the complex tapestry of Iraq, the Kurdistan region has often found itself in a uniquely ambivalent position regarding Israel, sometimes fostering quiet, unofficial ties due to shared geopolitical interests? By the end of this block, you'll understand this intricate, often unstated relationship. X1000 Duius, X1000D. Within Iraq's federal structure lies the Kurdistan region, an autonomous entity with its own government, the Kurdistan Regional Government, KRG, and its own armed forces, the Peshmerga. The Kurds have a long history of seeking self-determination, often clashing with successive Iraqi central governments, including Saddam Hussein's regime, which subjected them to brutal campaigns. X1000 or Stan, 1000 or Span, 1000 or. This shared experience of being a minority group seeking autonomy in a hostile regional environment has historically created a unique, albeit unofficial, and often covert, common ground between some Kurdish factions and Israel. Both have faced significant challenges from powerful Arab states, and more recently, from Iran. This has led to reports, some confirmed, of intelligence sharing, training, and even limited unofficial diplomatic contacts between Israel and various Kurdish groups over decades. 1000D. For the Kurds, particularly during times of intense pressure from Baghdad or regional adversaries, a discreet relationship with Israel could provide a valuable, if clandestine, source of support, intelligence, or even military training. For Israel, supporting the Kurds could serve as a useful leverage point against Baghdad in the pre-2003 era, or, more recently, against Iranian influence in Iraq. A stable autonomous Kurdistan, not aligned with hostile Arab or Iranian agendas, could be seen as a strategic asset. Prominent Kurdish leaders, such as the late Masoud Barzani, who led the Kurdistan Democratic Party, KDP, and his son, Masroor Barzani, the current KRG Prime Minister, have historically navigated these complex regional dynamics. While officially part of Iraq and therefore bound by its anti-Israel stance, their pragmatism has allowed for discreet engagements. Ojastal ahos, X1000 digasiyah, X1000 diyao. However, these ties are always unofficial and highly sensitive. The KRG cannot openly normalize relations with Israel without facing severe backlash from Baghdad, Iran, and even internal Iraqi factions. When the Kurdistan region held an independence referendum in 2017, Israel was one of the few countries to openly support it, a stance that was highly criticized by both Baghdad and regional powers like Turkey and Iran, who saw it as a destabilizing move. This Kurdish connection adds another layer of complexity to the Israel-Iraq dynamic. It highlights that within the formal state-on-state conflict, there are sub-state actors with their own foreign policy considerations that can, at times, align with or complicate the broader regional picture. X thousand Ds, sat thousand da sides. By the end of this video, you'll grasp how these sub-state relationships continue to factor into the delicate balance of power in the Middle East. Watch until the end to discover how regional water disputes, often overlooked, also play an indirect role in the strategic calculations of this complex relationship. Did you know that beyond direct military confrontations and political alignments, the scarcity of water in the Middle East subtly influences the strategic calculations between nations like Israel and Iraq? By the end of this block, you'll uncover how vital resources can become a silent but potent factor in regional tensions. Das X-thousand dort X-thousands dar Sararsen. While not a direct cause of the Israel-Iraq conflict, water scarcity is an overarching regional challenge that indirectly shapes strategic considerations and potential flashpoints across the Middle East. Both Iraq and Israel are water-stressed nations, relying heavily on transboundary rivers for their survival and agricultural needs. X-thousand Ds, Epes Gani thousand D. Iraq's primary water sources are the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which originate in Turkey and, to a lesser extent, Syria. Israel, on the other hand, relies on the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, Lake Kinneret, and aquifers, with significant portions of its water originating in or flowing through neighboring countries. As populations grow and climate change exacerbates drought conditions, the competition for dwindling water resources intensifies across the entire region. X-thousand, thousand, thousand D, thousand D. For Iraq, the construction of dams by upstream nations, particularly Turkey, like the GAP project on the Euphrates and Tigris, poses an existential threat to its water security, leading to disputes with its neighbors. This internal and regional water stress impacts Iraq's overall stability and its ability to project power or manage its internal affairs, indirectly affecting Israel's strategic environment. A destabilized Iraq, partly due to water crises, could lead to further extremism or internal conflicts that might spill over or create new security challenges for Israel. X-thousand, D. Conversely, Israel's own water management policies and its control over shared water resources in the West Bank and Golan Heights are a source of contention in the broader Arab-Israeli conflict. While Iraq is too geographically distant to be directly involved in these specific water disputes, the general perception of Israel's control over shared resources fuels the narrative of injustice that resonates in Baghdad and elsewhere. Moreover, in a region where states are constantly assessing each other's vulnerabilities and strategic dependencies, water security is often considered a critical national security issue. While there's no evidence of direct water warfare between Israel and Iraq, the underlying resource stress means that any grand strategic planning in either capital must account for water availability, population growth, and regional competition. X-thousand D, X-thousand D. Key figures involved in regional water diplomacy, such as UN envoys or experts from the World Bank, constantly highlight the potential for water scarcity to exacerbate existing conflicts or create new ones. While they don't focus on Israel-Iraq directly, their warnings underscore the foundational importance of this resource. Thousand Ds, thousand D. By the end of this video, you'll appreciate how the silent pressure of climate change and resource scarcity adds another layer of complexity to the already intricate geopolitics of the Middle East. Watch until the end to discover how technological advancements, particularly in areas like desalination, are reshaping some aspects of regional resilience, yet the core challenges remain. Did you know that beyond military and political rivalries, the vast oil wealth of Iraq and its flow to global markets has always played an indirect yet significant role in the strategic calculations of Israel and the wider region? By the end of this block, you'll understand the subtle economic undercurrents shaping this complex relationship. X-thousand D, thousand D. Iraq possesses some of the world's largest proven oil reserves, making it a crucial player in global energy markets. For decades, its oil revenues have been the lifeblood of its economy, fueling its military ambitions, sustaining its political system, and providing it with significant leverage on the international stage. For Israel, a nation with no significant oil reserves of its own, the stability of regional oil supplies and prices is always a concern, though not a direct point of conflict with Iraq. The indirect impact, however, is substantial. A prosperous and powerful Iraq, fueled by oil wealth, historically meant a more potent adversary. Saddam Hussein's ability to fund his WMD programs, maintain a large army, and project influence was directly tied to Iraq's oil income. The international sanctions regime after 1991, which severely curtailed Iraq's oil exports, was therefore seen by Israel as an effective tool to contain its distant enemy, X-1000D. Conversely, a destabilized Iraq, where oil infrastructure is threatened or production is disrupted by conflict, as seen during the ISIS crisis, can lead to spikes in global oil prices. While Israel's economy is diversified, such volatility can still have an impact, indirectly affecting its economic stability and defense budget. Thousands and store. Moreover, the competition for regional influence is often intertwined with economic power, especially concerning energy resources. Iran's growing influence in post-Saddam Iraq, partly through economic ties and control over certain sectors, also affects Israel's strategic environment. Any Iranian-backed entity gaining significant control over Iraqi oil resources or export routes could potentially use that economic leverage for geopolitical ends that are hostile to Israel. X-1000D. The economic dimension of the conflict is rarely about direct trade or sanctions between Israel and Iraq, as there is none, but rather about the impact of Iraq's economic health and its energy resources on its military capabilities, regional power projection, and the broader geopolitical balance. International oil companies and their investments in Iraq are also part of this complex equation, often balancing economic interests with geopolitical risks. X-1000D. Key global economic analysts and energy strategists, while not focusing on the Israel-Iraq dynamic specifically, consistently highlight the profound impact of Middle Eastern oil production on global stability. Their analysis implicitly underscores how Iraq's economic fortunes, driven by oil, contribute to the regional power equations that concern Israel. X-1000D. By the end of this video, you'll see how even seemingly distant economic factors play a subtle but crucial role in the enduring and evolving conflict dynamics of the Middle East. Watch until the end to discover how technological advancements are changing the economic calculus and potentially reshaping regional energy landscapes, adding another layer to this intricate story. Did you know that despite the absence of a shared border, the decades-long Israel-Iraq conflict has had profound, albeit different, impacts on civilians in both nations? By the end of this block, you'll understand the varied human costs of this distant, yet persistent rivalry. X-1000D. While the Israel-Iraq conflict largely played out through indirect means, intelligence operations, or the occasional missile strike, it profoundly affected the lives of ordinary citizens in both countries, though in vastly different ways. X-1000D. In Israel, the most direct civilian impact came during the 1991 Gulf War, when Iraqi Scud missiles rained down on cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa. For weeks, millions of Israelis lived under the constant threat of attack, forced into sealed rooms, wearing gas masks and listening for air raid sirens. The psychological toll was immense, creating widespread anxiety and fear. While the physical damage and casualties were limited compared to conventional warfare, the experience of being targeted by a distant enemy's ballistic missiles was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. This event forever etched the Iraqi threat into the collective memory of Israelis. Thousands. In Iraq, the civilian experience was far more devastating and prolonged. The conflict with Israel, while often a distant ideological concern, contributed to the context of Saddam Hussein's oppressive rule, massive military expenditures, and the disastrous wars that followed. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980-1988, which consumed vast resources and resulted in millions of casualties, profoundly impacted Iraqi families and society, leading to economic hardship and widespread suffering. While not directly caused by Israel, the constant state of war, partly fueled by the ideological conflict with Israel, was a heavy burden. Thousand-D. Then came the international sanctions regime post-1991, severely impacting the Iraqi civilian population. While aimed at compelling Saddam to disarm, the sanctions led to widespread poverty, crumbling infrastructure, and a severe humanitarian crisis, particularly affecting access to medicine and food. This period of immense suffering, though a consequence of Saddam's defiance and international policy, was indirectly linked to the ongoing containment of a regime that was, in part, defined by its antagonism towards Israel. X-thousand-D. Finally, the 2003 invasion and the subsequent years of insurgency and sectarian violence in Iraq led to millions of displaced persons, countless civilian casualties, and the destruction of infrastructure. While the invasion was not about Israel directly, the removal of Saddam, a longtime Israeli foe, ushered in this period of chaos that had immense civilian cost. Key civilian accounts and humanitarian reports from organizations like UNICEF and the Red Cross during the sanctions era, and later from human rights groups during the post-2003 conflicts, paint a grim picture of the suffering endured by ordinary Iraqis. By the end of this video series, you'll reflect on how conflicts, even those without direct border clashes, ripple through societies and leave a lasting human legacy. Watch until the end to discover how, despite these profound impacts, the door to genuine peace remains stubbornly shut and what the future might hold. Did you know that despite decades passing since direct hostilities, the legal and international framework between Israel and Iraq technically remains a state of war, with no peace treaty or formal diplomatic recognition? By the end of this block, you'll understand the implications of this unusual, prolonged state of non-peace. Unlike many other Arab states that eventually signed peace treaties or normalization agreements with Israel, like Egypt in 1979, Jordan in 1994, and more recently the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, Iraq has consistently refused any form of formal recognition or peace with Israel. This means that, from a legal standpoint, the two nations are technically still in a state of war, a unique situation given their lack of shared borders and direct, sustained military engagement for decades. This persistent state of non-peace stems from several factors. Firstly, Iraq's steadfast rejection of Israel's existence, rooted in deep-seated pan-Arabist ideology and its historical role in the Arab-Israeli wars, has never wavered publicly, even after the fall of Saddam Hussein. Subsequent Iraqi governments, heavily influenced by nationalist and, increasingly, Shiite Islamist factions, many with strong anti-Israel views, have found it politically impossible to deviate from this stance. Secondly, there is no international pressure nor any internal political will for Iraq to sign a peace treaty with Israel. Unlike the frontline states directly affected by the conflict and occupation, Iraq does not have any occupied territories or immediate border disputes with Israel that would necessitate a peace agreement. Its primary concerns are internal stability, regional security within the Gulf, and its relationship with Iran, X-thousand-D. Thirdly, Iraq's parliament passed a law in 2022 criminalizing any normalization of ties with Israel, effectively making any attempt at peace or even cultural exchange a punishable offense. This legislative act underscores the profound public and political opposition to Israel within Iraq, further cementing the current state of non-peace. This law, championed by powerful Shiite blocs, makes it impossible for any Iraqi government to even consider rapprochement without facing severe domestic consequences. X-thousand-D. This legal status has practical implications. There are no diplomatic relations, no trade, no direct travel, and no cultural exchanges. Any interaction, should it occur, is covert or through third parties. It means that Israel still formally views Iraq as a hostile state, and vice versa, even if the nature of their conflict has evolved from direct military confrontation to a shadow war against proxies. X1000 D. Key international legal scholars and diplomats who study conflict resolution often point to the Israel-Iraq relationship as an example of an enduring rivalry that defies traditional resolution frameworks, precisely because of the absence of direct incentives for peace. 1000 D. Dury. By the end of this video, you'll have a complete picture of why the Israel-Iraq conflict, despite its changing forms, remains legally and diplomatically unresolved. Watch until the end to discover what the future might hold for these two nations, and whether any path to a different relationship could ever emerge. Did you know that the public perception in both Israel and Iraq, shaped by decades of historical events and political rhetoric, continues to significantly influence the possibility of any future rapprochement? By the end of this block, you'll understand how deeply ingrained narratives impact the conflict's enduring nature. 1000 D. Public opinion plays a critical, often underestimated role in the perpetuation of the Israel-Iraq conflict, far beyond the actions of leaders or armies. In both countries, media narratives, educational curricula, and political discourse have consistently reinforced a particular view of the other. 1000 D. In Iraq, for generations, the narrative has largely portrayed Israel as an illegitimate, expansionist entity imposed on Arab land, a symbol of Western imperialism, and the primary cause of Palestinian suffering. This view is deeply embedded in nationalist and religious sentiments. Media outlets across the political spectrum, from state-controlled to independent, frequently echo anti-Israel sentiments. The Palestinian cause resonates strongly with the Iraqi populace, and any perceived deviation from solidarity with Palestinians is met with severe criticism. The previously mentioned 2022 law criminalizing normalization with Israel is a direct reflection of this widespread public sentiment. For the average Iraqi, Israel is not just a distant state, but an ideological adversary whose existence contradicts core Arab and Islamic principles. X1000 in Israel. While there isn't the same visceral, day-to-day engagement with Iraq as there is with immediate neighbors, the memory of Iraqi hostility remains. The 1991 Scud missile attacks, the WMD threat, and Saddam Hussein's constant belligerence left a lasting impression. Iraqi leaders, particularly Saddam, were often portrayed in Israeli media as ruthless dictators posing an existential threat. Today, the focus has shifted to Iranian influence within Iraq, but the underlying perception of Iraq as a potentially hostile entity, or at least a volatile zone, persists. Israelis often view the current Iraqi government through the lens of its ties to Iran and the instability it generates. Political leaders in both countries are acutely aware of these public sentiments, and often use them to their advantage or are constrained by them. No Iraqi politician could credibly advocate for peace with Israel and hope to survive politically. Similarly, Israeli leaders, while focusing on current threats, still refer back to the historical Iraqi threat when discussing broader regional security. 1000 D. This public perception barrier is arguably as significant as any military or diplomatic one. It means that even if pragmatic shifts were to occur at the elite level, popular opposition would likely make any overt moves towards peace impossible. This makes the Israel-Iraq conflict one of the most intractable in the Middle East, even in an era of shifting alliances. 1000 D. By the end of this video, you'll reflect on how historical narratives and public sentiment can create seemingly insurmountable obstacles to peace, even when direct military confrontation subsides. Watch until the end to discover how these narratives might evolve or persist in the face of new regional challenges. Did you know that despite a long history of conflict, the future relationship between Israel and Iraq is incredibly uncertain, shaped by both enduring historical animosities and rapidly evolving regional dynamics? By the end of this block, you'll explore the various possibilities for this complex and unpredictable trajectory. X1000D, RX1000D. Looking ahead, the future of the Israel-Iraq conflict, or perhaps more accurately, the nature of their relationship, remains highly uncertain. Several major factors will continue to shape this trajectory, none of which suggest an easy path to peace or even a stable, predictable state of non-belligerence. X1000D, A1000D. Firstly, Iran's influence in Iraq will remain a critical determinant. As long as powerful Iranian-backed militias wield significant political and military power in Baghdad, any move towards direct engagement or normalization with Israel is virtually impossible. Israel's shadow war against Iranian assets in Iraq is therefore likely to continue, making Iraq a persistent, albeit indirect, arena for the broader Iran-Israel regional rivalry. The degree to which the Iraqi state can assert its sovereignty over these militias will be key. X1000 Secondly, internal Iraqi stability is paramount. A stronger, more unified, and less internally fractured Iraq might eventually be able to pursue a more independent foreign policy. However, the path to such stability is fraught with challenges: sectarian divisions, economic hardship, and the ongoing struggle against remaining ISIS elements or other insurgent groups. A highly unstable Iraq, conversely, would remain a source of regional concern, potentially providing safe haven for hostile actors or leading to broader humanitarian crises that indirectly affect regional security. X1000D, 8X1000D. Thirdly, broader regional shifts will play a role. If more Arab states normalize relations with Israel, this might, over a very long term, gradually reduce the stigma associated with such ties for countries like Iraq. However, Iraq's unique historical and political context means it would likely be one of the last, if ever, to follow suit. Conversely, a major regional escalation, particularly involving Iran, could draw Iraq into direct confrontation once more, although likely as a theater for proxy conflict, rather than a direct state actor against Israel. X1000 Fourthly, leadership changes in both countries, and particularly in Iraq, could introduce new variables. A pragmatic Iraqi leader, less beholden to hardline factions, might seek to de-escalate tensions, though full normalization would still be a huge hurdle. In Israel, leadership will continue to prioritize security against distant threats. X1000D. Finally, global power dynamics, especially the role of the United States and other major powers, will continue to influence Iraq's trajectory. A reduced U.S. presence or a shift in U.S. policy could further empower Iran or create new vacuums that foster instability, impacting Israel's security calculations. X1000 By the end of this series, you'll have a comprehensive understanding of how deep the roots of this conflict run, and how complex its modern manifestations have become. Watch until the very end to hear our concluding thoughts on the enduring legacy of the Israel-Iraq conflict and its lessons for future regional dynamics. Did you know that the Israel-Iraq conflict, despite never being a direct border dispute, has left an indelible mark on the Middle East, fundamentally shaping regional security and strategic thinking for decades? By the end of this final block, we'll reflect on its enduring legacy and the lessons it offers. X1000D. As we reach the end of our comprehensive journey through the history of the Israel-Iraq conflict, it's clear that this is a rivalry unlike any other in the Middle East. It was never defined by shared borders or territorial disputes in the conventional sense, yet it remained a consistent thread in the complex tapestry of regional geopolitics for over 70 years. From Iraq's unwavering refusal to recognize Israel in 1949, through its distant but significant participation in the Arab-Israeli Wars of 1967 and 1973, to the dramatic 1981 Osirak strike and the terrifying 1991 Scud missile attacks on Israeli cities, the conflict evolved through distinct phases. We saw how leaders like Nuri al-Said, King Faisal II, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, and most prominently Saddam Hussein shaped Iraq's hardline stance, while Israeli leaders from Menachem, begin to Benjamin Netanyahu consistently viewed Iraq as a significant, if distant, strategic threat. The fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003 marked a dramatic turning point. It removed the centralized state actor that had been Israel's consistent adversary, eliminating the threat of a WMD-armed, aggressive Iraqi regime. However, this didn't bring an end to the conflict. Instead, it ushered in a new, more diffused and complex era, defined by internal Iraqi instability and, crucially, the rise of Iranian influence and its proxy networks across Iraq and Syria. Today, the Israel-Iraq conflict is no longer about two states poised for conventional war. It's a shadow war, Israel conducting alleged covert strikes against Iranian-backed militia targets in Iraq, leveraging advanced intelligence and drone technology, all while navigating a complex regional realignment where shared concerns over Iran sometimes create unusual, unofficial convergences of interest. The key takeaway from this extensive history is the remarkable adaptability of conflict. When direct confrontation becomes untenable, hostilities can shift to new battlegrounds, be they intelligence operations, proxy wars, or economic and political pressure. The Israel-Iraq relationship underscores that, even without shared borders, deep ideological divides, historical grievances, and shifting regional power dynamics can sustain a state of non-peace for generations. The future remains unwritten. While formal peace or normalization appears distant given Iraq's internal political landscape and strong anti-Israel sentiments, the nature of the rivalry will continue to evolve. It serves as a powerful reminder that in the Middle East, the echoes of the past constantly resonate in the challenges of the present, shaping an unpredictable future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most intriguing and often overlooked rivalries in modern history. If you've learned something new or found this series engaging, please do subscribe to the channel, share this video with friends, and hit that like button to support our work. We truly appreciate it.